Hello everyone, and welcome to your Chem 113 review on the activity series. My name is Jason and I work for the ASU Tutoring Center. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video, we're going to be talking a little more about redox reactions here. So with a redox reaction, something is reduced and something is oxidized. What I mean is, when I say reduced, it means that it has gained electrons. So if a species has gone from one charge to another charge, and by doing so it has gained electrons, then we would say that species is reduced. Whereas oxidized, we reserve for losing electrons. And typically in a reaction, if you're gaining electrons, those electrons have to be coming from somewhere. So when one thing gains electrons, when one thing is reduced, typically something else is oxidized. So that's where the electrons have to come from. So one thing loses the electrons that the other thing gains. A good way to remember this, it's very common, it's called oil rig. Oil rig. So oxidized is loss, whereas reduced is gain. Okay. So if you're oxidized, you lose electrons. If you're reduced, you gain electrons. Oil rig. Okay, so we're going to be focusing more on the oxidized part today because we're dealing with all of these various metals. And if we remember metals, how do metals work? The ions for metals are usually positively charged. Okay, metals are typically cations. So what that means is if you start with zinc and you want to get zinc plus, well, how did you get this positive charge on the zinc? You had to lose a negatively charged electron. So your metals that you're working with are all going to be oxidized. They're all losing electrons to form their ions. Okay, so that's why we're dealing with oxidizing here. So what an activity series is, essentially not all metals are created equal. Some metals it's easier to lose electrons from than others. That's what the activity series is. That's what this big, huge chart is over here. So essentially the ones at the top of the list, like lithium, these ones, really easy to lose electrons. The lithium does not like holding on to its electrons. It'll happily give them up and become a lithium ion. Whereas the ones closer to the bottom are really hard to oxidize. Okay, those like gold, platinum, they will hold on to their electrons with all their might. It would take an incredible amount of energy to separate them from their electrons and to form them into ions. Okay, so with that in mind, how does that exactly help us with our problem here? We're just trying to see which of these metals will oxidize lead nitrate. Okay, well, let's think about what that would look like, right? If we have lead nitrate, and say we're reacting with some arbitrary element, which I'm just going to call X. Okay, it could be it could be zinc, it could be copper, it could be iron, it could be anything, just some arbitrary cation. What I'm trying to do when I say oxidize lead nitrate, what I mean is I'm trying to essentially react it with whatever the species is, so that my lead becomes charged, and the X is now the cation in my reaction. Okay, so essentially when I say oxidized, I mean it reacts with it and swaps. So the lead goes from being in my compound to being an ion, and my ion now is part of my compound. I'm just using an arbitrary A here. It can be any number, because I don't know, this is some arbitrary element, right? So its charge could be 1, 2, 3, 4, who knows? So I'm just using A to represent that sort of charge. So we're trying to see what elements would possibly do this. Not every single element would. So the only way this would happen, the only way that X would kick out lead, is if X was easier to oxidize, than lead. So the only way this would happen is if X was easier to oxidize. Because think about it on the other end. If X was harder to oxidize, So what does that mean? It's harder to oxidize. It's harder for it to lose electrons, right? It's harder for X to be an ion. So if X was harder to oxidize, the energy it takes to break this bond, because that's how chemical reactions work. You have to break one bond before you can form the others. So the energy it takes to break this bond would be larger than the energy it would take by it would be larger than the energy that would be saved by bonding with X. So essentially, the amount of energy taken to break this bond would be larger than the amount of energy taken to form this bond. So it would take more bond for the reaction to go. You have more energy over on the reactant side than you have on the product side. So it would take more energy to happen than you would actually get out of it. So that's not energetically favored. Your reaction would not like that. You know, nobody likes doing that, right? Nobody likes having to put more energy into something and get a lower result out of it. It'd be much better if you could put less energy in and get a lot more results out. So if X was harder to oxidize, the reaction would not proceed because there would just be too much input of energy required and not enough payout. So we want to look for elements that are easier to oxidize than lead. So let's find lead. Lead is right here on our activity series. So the only ones that'll work are the ones that are easier to oxidize, so the ones that are higher up on the activity series. So let's look at zinc. Where is zinc at? Zinc is right here. Okay, so zinc totally works. Zinc would oxidize this. Okay, copper, where's copper at? Copper's down here. So copper's below lead, so it's harder to oxidize, so copper doesn't work. What about iron? Iron is right there, which is above lead, so iron also works. So these two would oxidize my lead nitrate. Okay. Cool. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching. As I mentioned, I work for the ASU Tutoring Centers. If you want more information about the free services we offer on all 4 major ASU campuses and online, please check out tutoring.asu.edu/content/tutor-search. By going here, you'll be able to find a tutor at your specific campus or online that'll be able to help you with your specific class. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day.